Primigon is the #1 monster designed for Monster Crown. My very first attempt at a Primigon sprite was my very first attempt at a monster sprite at all. Way back then, Monster Crown had a 58 by 58 monster sprite format, sort of like what you see in the first generations of Pokemon. 58 by 58 pixels, black and white, and 2 colors. Thankfully, I didn't have to restrict myself to using the background color as the white value, so I had a bit more freedom with the battle backgrounds and that sort of thing. That being said, I did start with a white background just to hash things out. I remember seeing it on the battle screen for the first time. I turned to my girlfriend and said, "Hey, I made this." It felt so good to make that and have it be my own. Even though it looked so basic to her, I was staring at the start of my own game and I felt so much excitement in that moment, seeing that first ever prototype of the battle screen. For Primigon, I wanted to create a large, animal-like monster that could convincingly roam the fields near the player's home. The initial body shape inspiration, believe it or not, came from these enemies in Bayonetta, which I was playing just before I started working on Monster Crown for the first time. Even though there's some similarities to Cubone, I really wasn't going down that route. With Primigon, it's not really wearing a skull. Instead, the bone of this monster has protruded from its skin, so its whole head is like the material of a horn formed around it. It can't be removed. Originally, I thought about making the head more visibly like armor or metal, but after deciding on a more natural basis for the Monster Crown world, the skull-made armor approach just felt right. In the beginning, Primigon had smaller eye holes, so making it look expressive was a challenge. If you look at the eye holes, they're naturally angry shape, but I don't really like portraying Primigon as angry. It's not a brute type. Primigon's temperament is cool-headed but not particularly friendly. If you don't get too close to it, it won't charge you or anything. It can respect you passing by and you'll each keep your distance from one another. This sort of characterization was necessary in the beginning to understand why a monster like this roaming the Windy Province wasn't really a dangerous threat to passerbys. While a rhino would be similar in real life to the size, weight, and toughness, this monster is a little safer to be around. It's also why Will was one of the first types when I was creating the type system. Primigon is the ambassador of the Will type and part of it from its initial conception. While Primigon has gone through some small design adjustments and much needed total resprite, it has remained pretty true to its origins. I considered making it grey or blue at one point, but it somehow made it feel less natural and less alive as an organic creature in this world. Because Primigon is #1 in the Monster Crown notebook, and it's the first monster you tame on your own in-game, I always wanted to give it a place on the farm. Originally, Meryl eventually gives it a nice little onsen to chill out in, but people started asking why Primigon couldn't be seen at the farm immediately after taming it. For that reason, I decided to have one of King Tenna's Primigon-like monsters stay instead, and eventually these two monsters find love and start a family. Primigon make great beasts of burden, but to show off Tenna's interest in breeding and having Meryl's skills at his disposal, I wanted him to have a stronger, slightly tougher version of Primigon bred to pull the cart and ward off wild monsters. Maybe one day one of those royal horned Primigon will be available for players. As for the naming, Gon is a frequent ending for the name of a dinosaur or dinosaur-like character, and Prima comes from the word prime, because Primigon was kept in mind in the original concept of monsters wanting to become prime or alpha in their territory.